Cool. Hey everyone, thanks for joining for the very first Zap talk of the year. So first things first, apologies if things are sounding a bit hollow on this side. I am in the process of moving, so I'm effectively here in an empty room. So I'm not, and it might sound like I'm in the bathroom or something. So I can assure you that's not the case. Cool. I don't know what the weather is like in the rest of the country. In Cape Town, it is absolutely freezing. So I hope those of you that are in the Cape Town area are keeping warm. And also, I assume we probably lost a lot of attrition due to load shedding. So if you are now watching a recording of this, sorry you couldn't make it, but I hope it's valuable. Cool. So yeah, let's just get straight into it. So I'll just do a quick introduction of Jacqueline or Jax, and I'll hand over to her to kind of do a bit more of an in-depth introduction. But so how this talk happened is, so for those of you that don't know, we have a regular in-person meetup in the Cape Town area as well, and she attended one of those meetups, and I think there was a lot of great conversation around the specific career paths within the world of design, but specifically in the world of like digital design and so forth. And I think I found that extremely interesting because, like, for me personally, like, I mostly come from the product design side of things, so I don't necessarily always have a lot of visibility into things like service design and so forth. And I also teach interaction design at Cape Town Creative Academy, so I often get a lot of questions from students about design related things beyond the world of interaction design and so forth. And I've never feel comfortable answering them. So I actually had her come and do a talk specifically for my students, just because I wanted to expose them a bit to some of the, like, I almost want to say sibling fields to interaction design. And like, honestly, it was just such a phenomenal talk that, like, I kind of hustled a bit and kind of bullied her into actually doing it for Zapped as well. So yeah, that's how we ended up where we are here. But yeah, just once again, any questions, please do post them in the text chat. We'll stop at whenever Jax wants to, or we can do a big like Q&A at the end, and probably Liesel or Justin will just like kind of run through them, and we'll respond accordingly. But with that out of the way, I am happy to hand over to you and let you kind of do your own introduction.
Awesome. Thanks, Gulk. Yeah, thanks for having me today. I'll just start. Hi, I'm Jax, and thank you so much for listening to me today. I always am so appreciative of people actually listening to the words that I say, and I really hope that it will be helpful to you in some shape or form. So for me, I love design, but I also think that it's kind of hard for people to do things in the world. And I like to think about the fact that designers are really good at solving problems. And in particular, we are very good at solving problems for people by listening. And we are really good at solving problems for people by listening and thinking in systems. So for me, if we can create more designers better, faster, so that we can accommodate the different things that people need to do in the world, yay, that is us winning. So how did I start out with this career toolkit? I've been lucky enough to have worked in the field for quite some time. So I've worked as an IC, I've worked as an information architect. I've done a lot of these roles myself throughout my career. And there you can see, like, that's a visualization of this career framework that I've basically, that's how I score myself. It's a self-evaluation. But yeah, I'm a hands-on principal experience designer. I've done quite a lot of work in the leadership space as well. Before I forget, please use the Miro board if you want to follow along. Like, I created 20 little cards there if you want to rate yourself while I'm talking. I'm a pen and paper kind of girl, so you'll kind of see me making notes alongside this. And I also uploaded a worksheet, A4, that you can print later if you want to go through it, as well as my talk, my print-friendly version of this talk, which is this one. So career toolkit, let's get back to that. So a few years ago, I was lucky enough to work in quite a large team and manage quite a lot of designers. And as the team was growing, I ended up having quite a large, like 12 other people in the team who were told that they were designers, but no one's really had spent a lot of time with the education and training of those designers. I call it like getting hit by the design stick, where people go, oh, you're a designer now, and you have to go into the world and do all the designy things that we do, that we've trained for. So this career toolkit was really born from that need, which is, how do I help upskill and cross-skill these 12 designers to help them feel more comfortable in the space that they needed to perform. The other part is, I've been doing this for a while, and people often go, hey, Jax, my friend is a BA and she wants to move into experience design. Can you talk to her? My friend's an architect. She wants to move over. So over the course of the last 8-10 years, I've just had a ton of those conversations. So that's kind of where this career toolkit is from. And in the last few years, I've also formulated like a lot more in-depth stuff. And I think, which is also kind of important to mention, is that this is the self-evaluation part of it. Because I think as designers, we're really good at teaching ourselves to do the craft, to be, learn the tools. I think we're really good at learning. But if we look at the market, there's a bewildering amount of job titles out there. And I think it really detracts from you just wanting to do your job. Are you a UX/UI? Are you a product designer? And these terms are quite scary. And for me, I just wanted to kind of help people with my coaching and mentoring to have a little bit more of a plan where it doesn't feel quite as chaotic as I think it often does. And, that's just one of those things, like it's an evolving field. So I'm going to take you through my framework now. So as I mentioned, pen and paper, link to the Miro board. So I really like this future scenario cone, or future cone. And I think it's kind of cool to talk about it in conjunction with planning your career, which is, if you think about it, there are certain things that are going to be, people go, oh, yes, but that's possible. Yes, I could get hit by a neutrino right now. That's totally possible. But how probable is that? And if it's probable, is it, is it plausible? But is it also probable? So for me, if we can think more deeply about the different tasks and abilities and things that we need to do as designers, and we think more broadly about how we interact and how the different areas work together, that really sets us up to think a little bit more carefully about what we want to achieve in our careers. And that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do, right? With this framework. So I'll start with the pillars of UX. And I mean, I'm going to just kind of talk through it, and I'll ask you to self-assess, and then I'll ask some questions. And that's how we're going to go. We're going to pause. So the idea is that it's quite not as interactive as it would be in person, but it's really there to pause and let us think about things to move on. Because as I mentioned, the skill that we're not always that good at assessing is, how good do I think I am at something? And when I say I am good at something, can I actually do it? Can I prove that I've done it? So how do we get into a habit of thinking about our own abilities without judging ourselves? because we spend enough time being judged in the work that we do. So part of the framework is also to remind us to not be so hard on ourselves, but also to give us a little bit of a baseline on what we should be focusing on from a reading or a learning perspective. Something that I should have added, and I was thinking about it when Skulk introduced me, is the different types of designers. So I'll just quickly talk about that. I don't have a visual for this, but basically I think of experience design as a continuum. So who are all the people who have to work together to get a good experience at the end? So that would be, we would call them UX designers, we might call them interaction designers, but very much UX writers and content designers and content strategists and UI designers and motion designers and all of the people who work with us to create the experience and who work in the field of design. You're my peeps. And this whole framework is there for all of us, not just for a particular capability. So that's the one thing that I encourage everyone to do, is to also think much broader about how they think about design. Or, it's not just the pixels on the screen. It's not just how we think about the task analysis of a person, but how do we cross-functionally work together to get like a really amazing experience or design for an experience. Right, that preamble over. As I was working through this, through my framework, I was like, look, if you want to work in the field of experience design, which is broad and deep, ranging from HCI to graphics to psychology to behavioral psychology, what you need to know is these 4 pillars of UX. So the first question that I'll ask, and I'll say, rate your knowledge, skills, and expertise, not just your knowledge, on the following topics, 1 being the lowest and 7 being the highest. Right, you ready? How would you rate yourself for accessibility? How would you rate yourself for usability? How do you rate yourself for credibility? And how do you rate yourself for findability? Right. Now, I hope people are there and listening. There are definitions there, but basically, my question to everyone listening is, was any of that a surprise for you? Like, have you heard of the pillars of UX before? Is it something that you do every day? Do you think that this is a ground of commonality that we can all share? If we think about accessibility, yes, it's a responsibility that we carry, hopefully, as part of the design process. But accessibility is very closely linked with our engineering partners and people that we work with there on the execution. So of course we need to kind of work together to make sure that we know what's going on. And if you can find time in your calendar and in your diaries to do a little bit of reading about that, read about the stuff that you don't know about. But I really encourage you to focus some of your energy in understanding those 4 pillars of UX better. Right, so that's something that, regardless of whether you're a service designer or a UX writer, I think those are 4 fields that you should know something about. Next part, task 2. As we go through this, you'll see there are a few typos, but we had load shedding earlier today, and I haven't had the opportunity to just fix my deck. So I'll fix that for later. Right. Did you know that there are 7 technical design skills? Pardon. Let me just have some water maybe. And this is where the continuum of experience design comes from. So on a scale from 0, 1 to 7, how would you rate yourself on experience design research and information architecture? Now, service design. How do you rate yourself on content design or UX writing? 1 to 7, how do you rate yourself on interaction design? And next, prototyping. How do you rate yourself on that one? Next one, interface design, UI design. How do you rate yourself on that? 1 to 7. Right. So that is the technical design part of it. and forms a huge part of how we plan our careers. And even if you're a leader who can't like cross over from another field, having an understanding of the different technical design skills is super helpful when you manage a team. But there you go. Those are the 7 technical design skills. So research, how do you understand the hearts and minds of people? Service design, how do you design a service? Like, so from all the way from the back end to the front end. Content design or UX writing. I flip-flop with the description there, but I finally landed on content design recently because that's also what we see more in the market of. But the one that you can read through this later. The one I wanted to pause at was interaction design. How much did you rate yourself for on interaction design? Go have a look. Like, kind of think about what that number is. Now, would anyone have a definition of interaction design? I guess I'll go because it's not that interactive. So interaction design is for people, or rather, let's start with interaction designer is responsible to understand how the people who use their system interacts with the interface and how the interaction on that interface affects the engineering or the software in the background. So if you think about that definition, it's huge because the human psychology part is think, feel, do. It is task analysis. It's system as information versus system as task. It is the field of research or the mechanism of research to understand what tasks people want to do. So it is cognitive psychology. It's behavioral psychology. Now, you don't need to be fully versed in all those fields to be an interaction designer, but you know, the laws of UX, like Jacob's law, Fitt's law, those are the things that you need to know as an interaction designer. It's part of your job to know this stuff. You need to know how the human brain works, like the 5 plus minus 2 rule, like when you design a navigation. When should you have a image in front of a navigation label, or when should you just have it alphabetical? Yeah, sure, we can test those things, but there are lots of psychology rules that we can follow to help us. So that's like a good-ish definition of interaction design. Now, my question to you is, did any of you think that interaction design meant designing micro interactions? How a button reacts, how a drop-down reacts. Now, that's common. Like, a lot of people have that misconception. And that is part of these different fields conflating into different areas. Now, this is the real question. All of that was just like getting us to this point. If you thought that interaction design was motion design or micro interactions, how did you rate yourself? And now that I told you what the definition is and you rated yourself high, are you willing to change how you rated yourself on that? So if you said 5 or 6, or maybe you even said 7, but you misunderstood what the field was about, are you okay with actually saying that that's 1 out of 7? Because that's what it means. Like, I just introduced a new field of study to you. Now, this is like an example, not because I want people to feel like they don't know everything, but more importantly, to have your mind open to knowing what you know and what you don't know. So for me, one of the key skills that you need as an experienced designer is being open to new data. So when you have a designer thought, a hypothesis, if you get more data, you need to be able to update your thinking around that. So when we come back to this exercise, if you evaluate yourself, you should be able to change your score, because that's part of what we need to do. We need to evaluate ourselves under the different situations. The other part is, as an example, information architecture. I have worked as an information architect, and I used to score myself 6 out of 7. And about 2 years ago, I was like, oh, no, I'm a 5. And the last 2 years, I just haven't been able to score myself at higher than 5 out of 7 for information architecture because I don't feel like I've been doing enough field in the work or enough work in the field. So I feel like I've really lost touch with some of the things I should be knowing about that field. And that's the other thing, like I love how changeable and mercurial our understanding of these fields are because they're evolving fields. That's why I love this job. It's so interesting, like these different things that we all do to work together. Anyway, so that's kind of how I would rate on the 7 technical design skills. I don't know if there are any questions or if anyone wants to pop a message into chat. No? 7 technical design skills. I'll show you a bit more. So let's look at this one. So this is what I call the shape of experience design. Now, this is where these visualizations become quite neat because if I, as a leader, it helps me being able to identify what skill sets, hard skills, the team, people in my team have. So I can start like looking at how my team members should be working together. So if I need to hire a new person, and I'm like, I have 0 people with content design skills in my team, then I'm going to move budget towards that particular role because I know that I need to flesh my team out. The other part is that as a junior designer, you might go, oh, 5 out of 7 for everything. Maybe, normally you'd start with one area of technical expertise that you would focus on. So you do interaction design or interface design. You wouldn't necessarily do all of them. You might end up moving into UX writing, or you might have, if you studied English, or you might move into XD research if you like come from a psychology or anthropology background. So it's really how the different expertise fall into the field. And then as you work with people, how do you like flesh out some of the other skills? So in this case, you can see there's a long tail going to service design there. So this is how a service designer could look. Here, big tail to interaction design. Prototyping and information architecture is also pretty strong. So 4 in my calibration, and that's why I didn't tell you what the calibration is before, because I think the act of thinking through how you would rate yourself is a lesson in and of itself. What that lesson is differs to different people, but from all the times that I've done this with people, I've never seen someone not learn something when they start thinking about how they evaluate themselves. Then in this case, this is an interaction designer. The 4 is that you can do production ready work. So you should be comfortable enough with production ready work. 3 would be that you're well versed, so you are able to do, like in this case, you're able to do an interface design on your own, but it might not look production ready. So you might need a little bit of help to just get it over the line to be good enough to be production ready. The other thing that I really like in pausing when we look at the technical design skills is that some of us are quite hard on ourselves and we're like, oh, but I can't possibly do the writing for this product. Sometimes you're the best person for the job and you can just go, okay, I know that it's not really my thing, but I am the best person for this job and I'm going to try my best and I'm going to work on it a little bit. So I hope that you're starting to see a theme here. The theme is don't be so hard on yourself. It's a huge field. We can always learn more stuff, but there is a certain amount of information that if we have that we are perfectly capable to do the work. And sometimes, like writing for me, I'm a great communicator, but I'm not a good writer. That's something I've been working on the last few years. So last 2 years, actually. So I don't think I'm ready. I have production ready writing skills yet, but I have had quite good feedback about my writing recently. So when we think about our careers, if you're really expert in a field, then sometimes you want to like hone in a little bit more, and sometimes you're like, hey man, I want to try something new. So in this case, you can do adjacent design things, like you can do information architecture or service design, which is so interesting. Or you can jump into like other fields. I want to do programming. I want to try this. So those are like the different options available to you. I'm not going to get to that part of the framework today, but here, this is information architect. This one, researcher. It's like obvious. Aha, what is this? So high interface design, high interaction design, high experience design research. This is a product designer. Now, this is the lens of the technical design skill. So that's great. But there's no information to show us how close you are to the product, how close you are to the strategy, how close you are to delivery in the team, etc. So the technical design skills only give you a certain part of that, a certain view. Interface design, sorry, this is a UI designer. So for me, if you're a UI designer, if you can up your prototyping skills, that's always really, really good. I think you need to be quite well versed in interaction design. So you don't need to be able to do production ready interaction design, but a lot of UI designers do end up doing that. So if you're working solo, I really recommend that you do a little bit more like reading and work around interaction design as well. It'll just help you. Next one, this one's easy. UX writer or a content designer, either job title works. This one, if you shape like this, would give you content strategy. So again, these are not hard and fast. This is not like, these are them rules, but they are quite good for us to think in a system, to think in a framework. So when we go through these, and there's like a summary of the different types. So if you're a junior UI designer, you just left uni, you might be very good at, let's say you did logo design, you did interaction design, more the visual side of it. For the first 2 years, focus on your UI design, like craft that skill, because a hiring manager will look for your capability and they'll be like, okay, cool. I think I could give a flow or a layout to this particular designer. And then I will have to help them with some of the other things. So if you're a junior, you kind of want to be strong on a technical design skill because that's your way in. If you're a BA, then you're already quite good at like navigating different conversations. You're good at like understanding how the business works. I generally recommend that if you come from a BA perspective, that you need to do a lot more primary research. You need to spend a lot more time listening to people, and not just do primary research. Talk to people, listen to people. So think about when we do research, it's the what, the how, and the why of on how people behave. So think about all of those things. If you are a front-end dev and you want to move more into the UX or the experience design space, man, you're like the boss at programming, so you're already a brilliant prototyper. So that's a really good way in for you. So those are some of the ways that I think I've helped people in the past. And yeah, if you are thinking about crossing over, I hope that will help. We'll get to the leadership part in a bit. So I've addressed like how you want to kind of improve your skills, your technical design skills, how to think about it when you cross over, how to think about it when you level up. And we'll touch a little bit on what to do if you're a individual contributor and you want to move into leadership. So the next part is personal traits. So it's not like a personality test or anything, but these are 7 topics that I found is super, super important for designers. Now, let's quickly self-assess again, right? So here, it's not really how good you are at it, it's how comfortable you are with this trait, or how much you think like this. How easy is it for you to deal with ambiguity? Do you hate ambiguity, or you're like, woohoo, I'm gonna do discovery all night long? Okay, 4 weeks. Sorry, that joke like fell flat on its face. And my cat is meowing. Grit is a psychological term that kind of means that you are willing to push through with things and you finish things. How would you rate yourself, your comfort level with that? How curious are you? What would you put your confidence at? How empathetic are you? Do you know what, do you feel what other people feel? Do you think what they think? Do you listen to them? How human-centered are you, or human-centric are you? Or do you just think about the business side of things? How experimental are you? Come on, Ada, not today. How experiment driven are you? So, are you happy to iterate through things and try things? Or is that something you find a bit scary? Now, this for me is one of the most valuable conversations because I have high grit. So have a look, think about like how you rated yourself, think about situations that you've been in, think about things that make you uncomfortable and things that you are very comfortable with. Um, so I want to use this example of grit. I have high grit. I like finishing stuff, but it's not always good for you to do that. So if you have high grit, the question could be, should I finish this? Is it worth my while to see this through? Or you're just suffering from like sunken cost, uh, like a fallacy in your mind. How curious are you as a designer? You need to have a certain level of curiosity. You also have to be able to deal with ambiguity. So if you're in a situation where you feel really down, you feel anxious about your work, if you're uncomfortable with dealing with ambiguity, instead of getting more anxious, just give yourself a break and go, I am not happy and good with dealing with ambiguity. And I've had to deal with ambiguity for the last 4 weeks at work. It's okay. Like, it's okay for me to feel like this. I will get through the work and it'll end and it'll be fine. So that's kind of what my hope is, that the personal traits aspect of the framework will help you with. Confidence, in my view, is probably the most important. Like both, it's a really important data point. So if you're overconfident, it's ruinous because you don't know how good you are. You don't know what you need to learn. You don't know if you need to listen. And sometimes it also pushes people away. If you're underconfident, it's really bad for your career. So in both those situations, like, when are you overconfident? Like, oh yeah, I'll totally be able to quickly do this, and you miss the deadline again. Overconfidence. So kind of just reading yourself a little bit better. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting better at it. But earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time making decisions while I'm very tired. So that's when overconfidence can really mess you up. So this is really to kind of have an idea of how you feel and also know that it changes over time. If you're underconfident, know which situations you need to puff up a bit, pretend a bit. Like, you need to do those like big body exercises before you present your work. Like, what like interventions can you create for yourself to help you with dealing with these different situations? So, dealing with ambiguity, and we've also talked a little bit about how the personal traits can affect you. Right, next one, rate yourself on how comfortable you are with, or how important, how good you are at teamwork, 1 to 7. How good is your business acumen? Also 1 to 7. How good do you think you are at scale and process? Think a little bit about your communication, and communication is super important. Do you get a chance to do facilitation? Like, how much facilitation do you do? Do you do different types of facilitation? Can you set up entire workshops? Can you, like, how good do you think you are at that? Think a little bit about how your critical thinking skills are. Very important for us. You need to be able to defend your design. You need to be able to look at what the current state of your design is, what future state you want, and how to adjust it to get to that point. You need to be able to use your research methodologies and like some of those UX laws, and use your critical thinking capability and like faculty to solve a problem. That's the one side. The other side is, how do you think about, do you know how much your brain likes to lie to you? It really likes lying to you. So like, what biases do you need to think about so that you can like either be like more of it, less of it, know what's going on? Behavior and activity, very simple. Do you remember to tell your boss when you're sick? Do you remember to put in your leave in time? And that seems really small, but especially if you, well, actually for everyone, if your behavior and activity, your professional behavior and activity is good, then the chances that your manager will like you they might not like you or think that you're better, but they will be very grateful and they will give you less shit about stuff, because chasing people for timesheets and stuff is not great if you're a leader. So if you can hone that, like those very simple things of being like your professional behavior, can make a material difference in how you get through your work. Great. So next part is leadership. So how do you rate yourself, your experience, like your lived experience on operations, finance, hiring and career development, vision and strategy, leading and management, relationship management, and quality of delivery? Interesting questions there. Anything that stands out to you? Let's talk about my weaknesses. Finance, your. Business acumen, great. Finance, I can't read those P&Ls. Like, I don't really know how to do accounting. So finance for me is always something that I spend more time on. Operations, can you work with other teams? So HR operations, legal compliance, design ops, research ops. So it's both outside of your team and in your team. Also quite important. Now, how did you rate yourself in vision and strategy? So again, this is one of our blind spots, is we go vision and strategy. I'm a designer. I am amazing at that stuff. But the question here is, can you prove that you're amazing at it? Have you had to like manage a team or a product for say a year or two where you were accountable for like how well that product does? Were you measured on KPIs for your vision and strategy? So the one thing that when we self-evaluate is how good we think we are. But the question we should sometimes be asking is, how much of this have I actually done? And how much of this can I be comfortable with? Now, again, this is a personal preference to a certain extent, but for me, I love information. So I like to be honest with myself on where I think I need to get more information on, because that's how I learn faster. The other thing that also stands out for me from a leadership perspective is people often rate that very high. Yet, when I speak to design leaders, a lot of them are uncomfortable about the work that they're pushing into the market. Yes, the work is fine, but you should have seen how good it was when we started out. So for me, quality of delivery is quite an interesting one. You can go and read through this. Leadership's hard. For me, leadership is just so hard. And I like this image because that's how you feel. Like just all these messages from all of these different sides. So that's kind of the main, like all the questions that we'd ask. There are different things that we would do if, like we were in coaching sessions, etc. But I hope the activity of testing or checking yourself across these different areas like helped you think about a few things. And the next step after this conversation, or when I stop talking, is for you to go back to these things and go, where am I and where do I want to go? Because that's what a framework like this is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to give you a destination. It's supposed to give you a view of where you are today. And it's supposed to give you a glimpse of how to get where you are today and into the future. And that's it from me for today. Any questions?
Any questions from anyone? Please post them in the chat if you have any. Here's one. I'm just going to take your deck away, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
There we go. From Emmanuel, from your experience, what have you found to be a good trade-off point between upskilling and handing over?
I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if I understand what handing over means here. Should I just talk about what I think it is, Justin?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So for me, there's no good trade-off point here. I think the question that I generally recommend people ask is, what do you want to get out of your life? And then you think what you want out of your career. So try and figure out like what you want to achieve in your life or in your environment, what will make you happy, and try and focus on that part. Because for me, designers, if you have ability and you have passion, that's where your capability just goes whoop. So I would say it depends where you are in your career. So earlier in your career, upskilling is super important. And then it's also, sometimes you get bored, like you just want to move between different things. So yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd happily answer your question in more detail if I didn't answer it properly, Emmanuel.
Another question from Krista. Any advice for junior architects transitioning into architecture?
So into information architecture.
I assume so, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to address both sides. So first thing is, let's talk about architects moving into experience design, which may not be your question, but I'm going to talk about it anyway.
Clarified into UX.
Okay.
So junior UX into...
Okay, that's the question I thought it might be. I'm actually trying to remember. I helped someone last year with this exact conversation. And what I recommended to her was that you need to, as an architect, you already were very well versed in information architecture. So how do people interact with spaces? That's the one thing. And the other part is you're really good at being able to gauge at how costly things are. So those are super good skills to move into the digital space. Then you're also you are trained to think in systems, because you're trying to think like how everything in the building works together. So those are like the things that you should be highlighting when you go and interview. But I think the difficulty as an architect is to get the interview. So I think in that case, I always recommend go and do do research. Like if you're moving over from a different field into experience design, always focus on research, because being a better researcher will always make you a better designer. And that's also something that a lot of people don't have. The other thing is that would be an example of maybe doing some interaction design and kind of doing some prototyping, just to show that you can do it. Because I think for a lot of hiring managers, they would be, I can see that you've done the work. I just need to find a space for you to be in my team. Justin, what would you say? Like, what's your comment around this, if anything?
In transitioning to
from architect to XD.
To be honest, experience design is not something that I'm that familiar with. Maybe Skulk has some comments on this.
So I just want to confirm. So it said UX. So
UX.
Yeah.
Then I will.
So no, I don't know, like these terms, they're also so like fuzzy, and it's very hard to delineate like when is it now UX and no longer like interaction design and so forth. I also think that I have specific views on kind of UX in terms of that it should be something that the team as a general should have a basic understanding of. But so I think the question is more towards kind of any of these kind of areas that you highlighted, Jax, and not necessarily like a specific one. And it's interesting. I actually find that people from the world of architecture actually seem to kind of catch on pretty quickly. And I think I've kind of been thinking about that like for a long time now. And I think it's just because of so much of the web and, like by definition, apps and all of those things kind of like are actually very influenced by the world of architecture. I mean, responsive design is actually a term that was borrowed by Ethan McCart from the world of architecture. Responsive design was an architectural term that he kind of superimposed onto kind of the web as like something that responds to a user. And likewise also, kind of the whole notion of design systems as we understand them today very much comes from a lot of the work done by Christopher Alexander by means of, what's that book's name? I think a pattern language or something. And that's very often referenced. And also that once again comes from the world of architecture. And I think that there's a nice interplay between the world of architecture in terms of making decisions that have a technical implication. And that relationship between architects and engineers that kind of is emulated very nicely within the world of software as well. Whereas I often find that someone who comes from a visual design, pure visual design background, there's actually a lot of stuff they need to unlearn first, because they mostly view design as as a visual exercise, and you don't have that kind of translation between modalities that you have in architecture, where you have the blueprint, but the blueprint itself isn't the actual product. Whereas if you come from a visual design background, the actual thing that you're designing is very close modality wise to what the final thing is going to be like. So I don't necessarily have any specific feedback, but apart from that, the fact that you're coming from an architectural background probably is kind of a benefit and not a drawback. So you probably have a lot more going for you than you maybe think you do.
Just to add something to that, I think commonality between architecture and user experience design or interaction design even is it's about how people interact, isn't it? With the physical space or with the digital space. So if you're really thinking about how those kinds of interactions occur, albeit in a physical medium, that's very kind of similar to. There's a lot of crossover there in how we think about how people are going to interact with the digital medium. So I think
and also just to add to that, I mean, you're already familiar with things like accessibility and so forth. Which is something that you don't necessarily have to deal with in the same manner when you're coming from a visual design background. You're probably further along than someone who's coming from a visual background.
It's all boxes, right?
Yeah, and I love it. This is exactly why I mentor and love coaching, is because I'm smarter because of this whole conversation, with what you just said, Skulk and Justin. That's so cool. The other thing that, I think I had a clever thought while I was listening to you, so I'll say it and we'll see if it was clever. But that's what I liked about it. It's for information architecture versus interaction design. If you're an architect, that's just system as information versus system as task. As an architect, you need to be able to see how people navigate spaces, and that involves information, but also involves tasks. I need to get to my desk. And that's not too far away from the thinking you need to do interaction design. But what I do also want to focus on or reiterate is that when we think about transitioning, it feels like the unknown. It is the unknown. You're moving from something you know to something you don't know. So because of that mode of thinking, you focus on what you don't know. My advice to everyone is focus on what you know, and if you go for interviews, or if you start your portfolio, write the stuff down that you're good at. And if you're not good at thinking about what you're good at, like me, then you pretend that you think you're good at it. But just write it down and put that in your portfolio and talk about that in your interviews with hiring managers. Because Hiring managers want to know that you can solve the problem. They want to know that you get an outcome. So focus on your strengths instead of worrying too much about what you don't know.
Great. There's a question from Rati. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Any good platforms to grow technical design skills or design skill metrics while you're still getting work experience? I think this is quite a common thing for people is how do I look at improving these kinds of things while I'm also having to work?
Yeah. So that is a very personal question, actually, Rati. So again, think about where you are in your career. So some of the questions that I would ask you is how much experience do you have? How comfortable are you with your core technical skill? Do you have a technical skill like graphic design, but you actually want to move over into more UX? So in that case, you would, if you have very strong graphic design skills, then you might want to go just read up more about the laws of UX, for instance, because that would help you cross that bridge to kind of the more digital design or informed part of digital design. So I really think it depends on you, but find those opportunities, like get into habits. So one of the habits which I actually think I've broken again, and whenever I break this habit, I become worse as a designer, is I don't read every day. So even if you read one article every day, try and do that. But yeah, I hope that helped. Again, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you wanted more detail that I couldn't give you now.
Related to that, Colin asks if you offer one-on-one career coaching.
Yeah, I do. I do.
Enter the promo code. Zap.
This is the part that I'm not so good at. But yes, I do. I do also. I haven't been able to do as much work in the last 3 months than I did in the beginning of the year, but I do talks like this as well. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll start posting when I do talks again, which should be soon, which is sessions like this, sessions in cohorts. Yeah. So if you're interested, reach out.
Follow on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's my social media of choice.
Any good books you know of for junior UI designers? Books are always tricky to recommend, I think.
The book that I recommend to everyone, and I read it every few years, is The Elements of User Experience Design by Jesse James Garrett. Like, that book is the bomb. Like, even today, like, if you need to go do strategy, you're like, oh yeah, how does product and like task overlap? Okay, cool. I need to do a content inventory. Okay, cool, I can do it. So yeah, I really recommend that book.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, I never let an opportunity go to plug. So I have a repo on GitHub where I just keep like all my reading notes and stuff. So there's also some great stuff in there if anyone wants to. I often give it to my students as well because it's nice for just like scanning some like basic concepts from the book and then like being able to decide if you actually want to kind of dive a bit deeper into it. But I think it's also important to note, like on the topic of reading, that there is a lot of like misinformation out there as well. So be careful. Specifically once you get into the realm of kind of medium.com, where it's like the 5 rules for effective UI design or whatever, and like the first one is, you know, like I'm like, if you do the first one, like, and you're on my team, I'm firing you. You know, so or you know those classic LinkedIn posts of which design is better, A or B. So just be careful in terms of what you consume, because it's one of those things that like this whole field is very, what would be the word, subjective, which means there's ample opportunity for a lot of charlatans out there. So just be mindful.
You know, if if it's a book, you're in good territory because that has to get through
Yeah.
a lot of control.
It has to get published. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
We do
Smashing
have
Magazine is always good.
Smashing
and
Magazine,
List
very good,
Pod.
yeah.
And Rosenfeld, if you can
Mm.
afford their books, they always have good Rosenfeld media.
We actually also just on this note, we've got a books channel on ZAPD Slack.
Ah, yeah.
There are quite a few recommendations in there. So also check that out. If you're looking for I know we made some recommendations fairly recently. I know Skulk, you put some things in there, and so did I, and a bunch of other people. One that came up was Super Friendly, I think, from everyone as a more recent book that I really enjoyed.
Isn't it user friendly?
Is it user friendly? Ah, yes. Sorry, what am I saying?
Yeah, super friendly is Dan Moore.
Yes.
I haven't read either, so I'll see if I can find those.
No, user friendly isn't. Super friendly isn't a book. It's
No, it's a
Dan Moore
company.
agency.
It's
Dan
him,
Moore's
right? It's
agency.
Dan Moore.
Yeah.
I just think he wrote a book, and I'm behind schedule as always.
Right. Some more questions. How do you determine what level you're on? Junior, middle, senior? Sure.
Hey, Bhavani. Nice to see you. Yeah.
I would like an answer to this as well.
You need to just hang out with people, yeah. I am actually trying to figure that question out as part of this framework. So the self-evaluation and then the provable bit, but I don't have an answer for you yet. I think we're connected on LinkedIn, but Org Design for Design Orgs, there's a great a pyramid that they publish that is helpful. So I'll share that with you, or just pop me a line if you forgot, or if I forget. But it like the one aspect is like how many years experience, which I think is very fallible, because if you're super into anything and you suck up information, then you learn much faster. But yeah, basically also know who you should compare yourself to. So like go and talk to the best person that you know in the particular field, and they might not want to tell you what level they think you're on, but they will tell you if you're wrong. So if you're like, well, I think I'm a junior designer, they'll go like, no, you're not. You're definitely not a junior. So you can also kind of get responses that way. I hope that helped.
I think it's also important to note that generally you're kind of a junior or senior in specific areas as well, which I think lends back to your actual talk now. I'm definitely a junior in information architecture. So I think that's also important to keep in mind. I wouldn't say that someone's a junior or a senior just across the board. I guess it's what you apply for, in the context of what job you're applying for. Okay, any other questions?
Doesn't look like we've got any others.
Okay, I have a big bomb to drop, as I always do. What is your take on design education in 2022?
That I need to spend more time with design educators, because I don't feel like I'm as informed as I should be, which is partly why Skulk and I spend time together, is because I was like, I need to spend more time with design educators. No, I think we all hear the horror stories about people like going on these boot camps and who get like ripped off with money, and we know that the field's very lucrative. It's the last year or two, it's the first time in my life where I heard that people are joining the field because they want to make money, which just blew my mind. Because we all ended up here because we love our work. So yeah, I think, but with all of that said, I've been doing this for a long time, so I feel like a lot of the information I know because I grew up with the field, but I also had to figure a lot of it out from first principles. Or you would figure something out and you'd like go, oh, that guy does something similar, and then you'd like kind of start mashing those ideas up, which helps you in certain ways, but is very time consuming because it's something you need to spend time on. And I think the design education that I see today, with some of the exposure I've had, is really good. Like just so for me, the education part, I think we're doing a good job at. I'm not sure how human-centered we are. I think the human centricity for me is an issue, not necessarily in education, but everywhere. And how do you facilitate those conversations? Because that's what your job is. Your job is to go, we're going to make this business money by making the customer happy. So if you don't do that aspect, then who does that? And that's how a lot of companies fail. Anyway, Skulk, I don't know if that really answered your question.
No, I was hoping for something a bit more, what would be the word, divisive.
Yeah, I'm not your divisive person. I'm the person who goes like, "Woo! I can see how these things can work together."
Everyone play nice. Yeah, like I have some strong opinions about design education.
Well, I'm sure, just like when anyone talks to me about like, oh, I'm in like, I do this. I'm a UX, and I'm like, where's your task analysis? We all have opinions about the stuff that we are passionate about, our area of focus.
Yeah, sure. But that being said as well, I think a lot of it is just because like it's such a hard field to emulate in an academic setting, because you kind of sit in what in the world of academia you would call a liminal space. So you kind of sit between other fields. It's very hard to kind of just do this type of work just in a silo. So how do you kind of emulate that in an academic setting where someone isn't getting pushback in terms of this is technically too hard to build, like you're designing a solution that the developers can't build, or you're kind of going over budget, or this is taking too long to develop, or you're overthinking it, like those type of pushback. And I often find a big part of the job is actually facilitation. And I think a lot of those things kind of tend to have a hard time fitting into kind of our traditional kind of academic ways of thinking about like teaching and so forth, which, I mean, like the coaching you're doing, like I think this is definitely where we are moving to. Whether it's the right approach or not, I definitely see that type of thing becoming more prevalent, where people do take that type of model. Yeah.
And maybe we can generalize your statement to I was thinking about that. It's like, how do we get people to level up faster? Because as a design educator, that's kind of what you're doing. Is you're making people ready for the workplace. And I think I said that to you as well. It's like when we last spoke about this, the only way that I think you can really progress there is by involving more experts from a practical perspective in the education process. Or as you do, you're someone who still works in the field. So you have exposure to the practical constraints in working in teams. But that would be a cool exercise as well. It's like, here's the design.
Yeah.
I as engineer said this. How are you going to change it?
Yeah. Just throw a dice. Is it good? Is it not? But I can go on about this forever. But I think one thing for me specifically is just that, as you mentioned, it is a very lucrative field. And some of us find our ways into kind of the mentoring space and the teaching space and so forth, despite the fact that actual work in the field itself is so lucrative. So a big problem becomes then in terms of getting people kind of involved. You kind of have to compete with kind of those type of like salaries and which is tough for an academic institution. Who doesn't necessarily have the pockets of like your Takealots or your Showmaxes or like your big tech companies.
Some of the players that we're starting to see entering the market right now, which is making it very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, I don't want to hog the discussion.
Yeah.
I saw some other questions come up.
Yeah. So we've got a question about design systems and then a comment and so on. So this might also be your divisive moment, Scott.
Yeah, I think there's a specific quote you can a tweet you can throw in the mix, Justin.
So, Kai, yes, I think that you definitely asked the question that I do have a strong opinion on. So basically, if you go look at Shopify's
Polaris, I think it's called.
Polaris, that's
Laura,
it.
yeah.
Go look at Polaris. Polaris is really, really good. That's a good design system. So for me, like when people talk design system and I ask like, what's the basis of your tone and style guide for the words you use, and people don't know what that is, then you're definitely lacking in your design system. Your design system is a blueprint to help your engineers and your design team, which includes your writers, your UX designers, and your UI designers, to have components and principles and rules to be able to deliver things quickly so that you focus your energy on the hard problems. That's high level. I haven't thought about design systems in a while, but yeah, I hope that helps. But yes, it's not just a UI library. And also if you have a design system and you don't have designers and engineers working together on it, I wouldn't classify it as a design system.
Great. No need to quote that tweet. So.
Yeah. So just a specific one that like Justin knows which one I'm thinking about. So there's one by Mark Dalgish, which is, I think it goes along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, which is if your design system isn't in code, it's not a design system, it's a design suggestion. Yeah. But yeah, like I think like a big thing is a lot of people have like just kind of taken what was traditionally called style guides and just started calling it design systems.
Yes, very much so. Yeah,
like
yeah, and also, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. We actually had a panel discussion on design systems last year. That's on our YouTube channel. You can go and check that out. There was a lot of interesting discussion that happened there, particularly around design systems. Yeah, I mean, there's so many articles you can read these days about our design system and why it didn't work, and why it was never used, etc., etc.
I always like whenever the topic of design systems come up, I always start with kind of stating that, you know, so when was it? Was last year with the design system survey? It's kind of like a broad survey they do, and 60% of respondents said that they didn't consider their design system a success. Don't consider their organization or their project or whatever's design system a success. That's massive, and I think like that we just glance over that. Like that means if you're starting a design system today, like there's a bigger chance that it's going to end up as a failure than it's going to end up as a success. So that implication here is that a lot of our conventional wisdom around design systems and the ways we approach them obviously isn't working. So I think any discussion on design systems should always start with that fact that like we as a broader tech community we're not getting it right. But yeah.
I think the other heuristic that I've also noticed, and I'm quoting one of my friends who's a head of design. She's like, if you don't have a design system team, do you have a design system? So of course that shows that you're much further along, but that the revenue or the amount of money that a company pushes into a design system, there's a certain level of complexity that you need for you to really need a design system.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think those are all the things that, you know, I think also helps us talk about these things. And I think the movement around design systems being very like command and control has not been helpful. So the engagement model in getting stuff into the design system has been problematic. And that's why there are so many issues. in my view.
So also, so there's a really great article by someone called Sandy Metz. It's more kind of about programming, but I teach it to my design students as well, because like when we start getting into design systems now, we're actually starting to get into a lot of like programming principles around kind of like encapsulation, making things modular, specific instances of a bigger class of a thing, and so forth. And like she has a really great article. It's pretty old by now, but it's had such a big influence on my career. And that is that, as a rule of thumb, duplication isn't necessarily the best thing, but duplication is always cheaper than the wrong abstraction. So, and I think this is where like a big problem with a lot of our approaches to design systems is that I think we start abstracting into a design system too early without actually getting a sense of like what are the modular problems that can be solved. We start creating like reusable components without actually even without actually confirming that this is an actual pattern that needs to be solved over and over and over again.
And to add to that, Skulk, what my particular bugbear with design systems is when it's not tested. So who decides to put this into the system without it being user tested?
Yeah.
So there are all these steps that you need to go through. But yeah, we're going deep now. This is cool.
And we're preaching to the choir, Like I think all of us understand how hard design systems are. Yeah.
We have another career related question. From Nelisa.
Hey, Nelisa. So nice to see you.
Going into the management space or starting your own design practice? What alternatives?
Well, it sounds like we should just meet for coffee. No, I think, Nelisa, we're seeing some movement towards principal design. So recently I've been talking to a few people who are already moving much more, like moving their companies and agencies towards the research side. So we're starting to see a much bigger need for design strategy. So I think, continue doing what you've been doing, but like just work on your craft. Also look at relationship management, so like managing the entire ecosystem, because as a principal designer, that's quite important for you. I think that's kind of what I would say. Of course, start your own design practice, but then you need to do stuff like taxes, which might not be what you want to do, or maybe join a consultancy space would also give you some of that, and you need to be at a certain seniority to be able to do that.
Right. I think we've covered all the questions. Let me just double check. I've just posted the link to the design system discussion we had in the chat as well from last year, if you're interested in checking that out. And I think we can close here. Oh wait, one more question.
Pull the fast one on us.
That's such a good question, and I feel like that's the one that I don't feel. Everyone always talks about Erica Hall's Just Enough Research.
I just wanted to bring that one up.
But I mean, for me, who Indy Young. Which one was that? So Indy Young talks a lot about mental models, and I really something about empathy. That's her second book, but I felt like that was one of the books that I learned more about research than a lot of other things that I've read. It's just the approach and how she listens to things. So I really enjoyed that, Indy Young. And then Erica Hall, you can't go wrong with anything from her.
That's a book apart. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll follow up on this. We'll post all the book suggestions in the ZAPD Books channel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I also just want to add the Erica Hall one like I often give it to my students as well, is because like I think it really wrestles with this I don't want to say paradox, tension, like in terms of kind of like what we would consider actual like research and like what we often have budget to do in this world. Which I know a couple of actual researchers, and they would be appalled if they saw what we call research. But like it's like you can't take 3 years to establish whether a button should be there or not.
We cannot.
It's not something I want to make too many promises about, but I am working on a practical course or something around research, because I don't think there's anything that condenses what we need to do. So combining, qualitative, quantitative, how, what, and why research. Like there's no short, like little handbook to just help you through that. So it is something I've been working on, but I don't know when I'll get to it.
That would be great. I think it's something that people struggle with a lot because you always, as you say, you hear the term research, but how do you approach that given constraints, as Skulk has mentioned? Because as we know, there are always constraints on UX and design, despite what organizations might say in terms of money.
Specifically in terms of research, like or when you have the option of making the thing look more pretty or actually doing research, guess what's getting money?
No, it's a perennial problem.
That's if you're even doing research at all.
But it is getting better, so that's
that's
good. We've worked really hard to get better. It's getting better. Okay, cool.
We've got one more question.
Yeah.
Was that last one?
Hey, Liz.
Becoming a specialist can be independent from being a team leader or manager, or does a career in design result in both simultaneously? That's a great question.
Not sleeping, Liz, not sleeping. So no, I completely, I think, who is it, Tobias, I forgot his name now, Tobias, the founder of Shopify, he's renowned to talk about the fact that he wants people at Shopify to see their careers not as like a ladder, but like more like a jungle gym. So
that's great.
They get encouraged to move in different directions. So for instance, with you, like finishing your, like working a lot more on your research stuff. So you're definitely focusing on that as a technical design skill, and all the leadership stuff that you're doing. So you're already kind of buffing up your experience in that area. So at a certain point, I guess you might get bored, or you want to try a different thing. And then you might choose to kind of move more towards like a principal designer role. So this question is a little bit, I'm just contextualizing it for everyone, because I think Liz and Melissa knows this, but Liz and Melissa's asking very similar questions on how do you kind of do more design without having to manage a team. Then the bit that is hard is doing both. So that's the bit that I generally try and do, is I try and keep my hand in with doing at least conceptual design and research while I manage people. But it can become very, very hard to juggle all of those things. So, this is why burnout lies, but it is possible. But you need to be in the right position and the right space. And you can also kind of timeshare that, where you're like, for the first 6 months of your year, it's going to be a lot more practical. The other thing that you can do, Liz, which is what I do, is I spin up departments. So I start by doing the work, and then we just grow the team. And I'm like, okay, cool, you have a team now. Adios, I'll go to the next thing. So that's another thing that you could try.
I think also it's important to also note that some, like talking about, kind of becoming a specialist and so forth, some skills are a bit more technical than others. So in my case, I like almost like not almost I exclusively do contractual work, and that is because like the area that I find that I excel in is interaction design, specifically when it comes to like mapping state and figuring out how state, like specific UI states, tie into like the actual underlying architecture, like in terms of the code and the like whatever. And like that, like I'm not near like what I would consider kind of like the like a cap in terms of like skill, and I've been able to kind of do that almost exclusively just as a contractor. But obviously some skills tend to be a bit more strategic and very hard to kind of just do as a single person. Yeah.
Right. I think we shall leave
Quickly,
it there.
before someone asks something, Justin.
Switching off the chat.
Yeah.
Just to say thank you so much, Jax. That was fantastic. Thank you for giving us your time, sharing your Miro boards with us and so on. And I hope people get a lot of use out of that. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, so thanks again. The video takes about 24 hours to process on YouTube if you want to watch it back. And we will also share it again in the various channels for anyone who may have missed this evening due to load shedding and such like. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, thanks to everyone who joined us. Have a good evening and we'll see you at the next one.
Stay awesome. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.